Portsmouth Historical Society was established in 1938 and the main building that it has is donated by the Union Congregational Society in that year, and it was organized at that time. The location of the Historical Society on the corner of Union Street and East Main Road was once the Christian church in Portsmouth. There was one church built here in 1824, and then another church that was torn down. Actually, it was moved, and it was this one was built in 1865. The Historical Society has this corner of the property where we have not only the church, but we have the original one-room schoolhouse built in 1725, and we also have the original town hall from the early 19th century. This church was used by the Society until it disbanded in 1939. That was the Union Society. Various people have preached in this church. The pulpit behind me was carved by one of the ministers, Reverend Miller, at one point, which is quite an extraordinary piece of carving here. You can see it here behind me. We have the communion serving over here, and we have a lot of the Sunday school records and congregational hymnals and things like that from the church back then. And among the people who spoke here were William Ellery Channing, who was a minister of the Park Street Congregational Church in Boston back in the early 19th century, who had a summer home nearby at Oakland Farm, and also Julia Ward Howe, the author, the poet who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic as a poem, which was later set to music. She lived down Union Street, just a little ways down here. The organ in the church here that was brought in 1902 from Emmanuel Church down in Newport. It must have been a rather huge project to move this thing. It's gigantic, and I'm sure that when it was played, the whole building just shook because of the size of it. All these different pieces. It's really quite an extraordinary thing, both artistically and for the purpose it was used. However, unfortunately, it's not been restored. It's been talked about restoring it many years ago, but it proved to be a gigantic expense to do so. But it really is quite nice with all the lettering and flowers and things like that on it. There is a pump behind it, a handle that was attached to a bellows, and while the organ was being played, someone was back there pumping it, just like you may have seen in the 19th century. That's how they powered these things. This room is what we call the Julia Ward Howe room. There are quite a few pieces of furniture and so on, like the bed and the chair, that came from the summer home of Julia Ward Howe. She had several homes. She had one in Newport, but she also had one in Portsmouth. Her basic location was in Boston. We have a picture of her over here. There are several pictures of her around the room. And the bed, for example, the chair, I believe the sewing machine all came from her home on Union Street, which is probably about a mile from here, a little bit more than that. At the turn of the last century, Dr. Benjamin Green was a physician in town, probably one of the 3 or 4 physicians in the town. Portsmouth was a very small town then, probably with about 2,500 people or so in it. And what he did when he died was his medical equipment was left to the Historical Society, and here it is in this case here. Some of it, by modern day standards, is relatively primitive, but it is really kind of interesting to see what a doctor used for equipment and bottles and scrub brushes and all kinds of different things from that particular period. What we have here is a display including the painting of a woman by the name of Sarah Eddy, who was an important person in Portsmouth history. She was an artist, and she ran what was called a social studio in the town, where children could go to learn proper manners and things like that. There's quite a display of her work here. Recently, a television show was done by the Historical Society on Sarah Eddy. Her house is still here in the town. There aren't any descendants of her, but it's really quite an interesting person in our history. She wrote quite a few books too, self-help kind of things, which is very good. And so she was an artist as well. She was a painter. Also in the museum, among the other artifacts that we have here in the museum, are a number of Revolutionary War cannonballs. We had a battle during the Revolutionary War right here in Portsmouth, the biggest battle in New England, actually. The last battle in England, not the biggest. And we have cannonballs from that. We have various other artifacts from World War I and World War II. We have quite a few other things, some ancient Indian stones that were probably used for grinding. We have ship models, we have Victrolas and radios and all sorts of early artifacts from local history. We also have a lot of toys that are here from early in the 20th century. And I mean, the history of Portsmouth goes back to 1638. So we're in our 377th year. And so none of these artifacts go back quite that far, but it really is kind of a unique museum for us to have here. This is a Chickering piano that dates back probably to about 1858, 59. It has incredible artwork on it and inside it. And it has ivory keys, which is really makes it pretty unique. It's a beautifully carved piece of wood, and it's just one of the real treasures that we have here. One of the really unique things that we have here in the Historical Society Museum is this hearse. It's a hearse. Most churches had their own hearses back in the 19th century, and there was some discussion as to whether or not this one belonged to this particular church. That's sort of been downplayed, but what has been decided is that because this was donated to the Society in 1943, and at that time it was about 75 years old, it goes back to about the 1870s or so. Obviously it's in need of rather significant restoration, but it's really quite a unique thing to look back into the 19th century and see it. It's really quite a special artifact that we have here. It isn't too difficult to put your imagination to use and try to figure out how this was used, when it was used, and so on. The Southernmost School that was distinguished from the Northernmost School when they were authorized by the council back in the early 1720s. This building was built in 1725 and served the southern part of Portsmouth. Needless to say, Portsmouth had a very small population at that time because this school building was used for all education from first to eighth. It's been restored. We have quite a few old desks here from different vintages. The four that are in the corner over there are, from what we can tell, is fairly early. I think I always have to be careful about earliest. But the building itself is probably the oldest in the state of Rhode Island, the oldest school building in the state of Rhode Island, and possibly the oldest, there's some consideration it might be the oldest in the country. A book was written about one-room schoolhouses a couple years ago, and this one was featured in it. We had displays and pictures and so on of that. But it is quite unique, and we have the teacher standing up at the front, and we have the stove in the middle, which kept everybody warm in the wintertime. And it was, the building itself was located at the far end of the street it's on now, which is Union Street, and then it was moved to a farm and used as a tack shop on a farm until 1952, at which time it was donated to the Historical Society. It was restored with the help of a foundation, the Champlain Foundation, in the year 2000. And so it's quite a treasure to have this here. It's very unique. What we also have in the entryway of the school is a wall which has not been repainted because it has quite a bit of graffiti on it, with a number of initials and some dates that go back to 1882 and so on. And the graffiti carries over the door frame on the right, to the right of it. But it is quite interesting, and we are pretty sure it's original stuff that we have.